The topic today is China. China to Americans looks fearsome, but of course we're separated by a wide ocean. But for China's neighbors, of course, they're not that protected. So the question today is, what are countries in the region going to do? So, Cleo, Paskal, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, what are countries in the region doing to protect themselves from Beijing?
Thank you, Gordon. The countries that are around China have been dealing with China for decades. They know exactly how complex the problem is and how difficult it is. And as we've heard throughout CPAC, it's in many areas. It's intellectual property theft, it's rigging elections, it's military, it's economic, it's across the board. So what they're trying to do now is deal with the sharpest point of the stick, which is defense. And in terms of defense, there's a lot of working together in things like the Quad, for example. So the Quad is Australia, Japan, the US, and India, and it holds a lot of hope for the future.
Okay, you mentioned the Quad, Cleo. Jay, the Quad can really trace back its ideological roots to a speech in 2006 by a former Japanese prime minister who was then the foreign minister, Taro Aso. And he talked about an arc of freedom and prosperity that the region should be forming. In other words, a democratic country is getting together. Why was Japan the one to see this danger before others?
もうそれは答えは明確で、もう歴史の法則があるからです。中国という国はもう力が増してきますと必ず膨張主義を取る、必ず、外に出ていくという、そうした行為を取るというのはもう歴史の法則だったからです。ちょうどあの頃2006年頃というのはもう南シナ海の領有権を主張したり、それからチベットへの人権弾圧が非常に強くなった時期でした。だから日本としては警戒を始めたわけです。
Okay, and that's really important for Japan being the first. Congressman Greg Steube from the great district of Florida 17, which you just told me is the only place in the U.S. where you can go rodeo riding and surfing in the same day. That's great.
It's probably the only congressional district in the world. You can surf on Sarasota and Charlotte Shores and then go to the Arcadia Rodeo in the afternoon.
Okay, there you have it. Tourist information for everybody.
Yeah, there you go.
Congressman, we heard from both Cleo and Jay about the Quad, this grouping which is forming of India, Japan, Australia, the U.S. You serve in Congress. The question is the United States really going to be there for the other three members of the Quad? In other words, is the United States going to be there for the region as a whole?
Well, the United States was there for those members and those allies when President Trump was the president. Unfortunately, with President Biden and his administration, I don't think you're going to see the level of cooperation and the opposition to Chinese aggression that we had under the Trump administration, which, as a member of Congress, is very disappointing. In December, this past December, John Ratcliffe, who was the head of DNI, said that the Chinese Communist Party was the #1 national security threat to the United States. So you have that declaration from our highest intelligence official in the United States in December, and now you have a new administration that is taking a very dramatic and different approach to Chinese aggression. And that's multiple different facets, whether it's interns or students coming to the United States, whether it's the type of things they're doing from an intellectual property standpoint, whether it's offshoring of businesses. To me, that's a real concern as a member of Congress. It's a real concern for Americans, and we should be standing with our allies in the region. I had the opportunity to serve in Iraq in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and the Aussies and the Australians, even going back decades have always been a strong ally of the United States. So we need to solidify those relationships that we have with the countries in the region and ensure that the Chinese aggression that is happening in that region doesn't push forward.
That's a really important statement. You know, I asked the Twitterverse, what did they want me to ask the panel? And by far, the number one question is, what is Biden going to do with regard to China? Everyone is really concerned. I'm sure that, Congressman, that your constituents must be concerned as well.
It's one of my top concerns. I also sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee, so obviously this is the thing that we should be focused on. Unfortunately, the Democratic majority is not focused on it right now. But President Trump did so much to put America first. And that were policies that brought jobs back to the United States, that were trade policies. And I'll give you a quick example. So I have a bill. You wouldn't believe this, but the Department of Agriculture right now, my congressional district is the #1 congressional district in the country for the production of citrus. So if you're drinking orange juice while you're here in CPAC, it probably came from my district. We are now allowing for the importation of Chinese citrus. Why in the world would we do that during a time where our agricultural producers here in the United States are facing a COVID pandemic, the issues that they faced with schools shut down in the beginning of the pandemic, they're losing product value. Why would we put domestic farmers in the United States, let's not even get it into a safety discussion about a food product, but why would we put domestic farmers in jeopardy by importing Chinese produce of all things? So there's so many different facets of this that the Trump administration was pushing against, and that the Biden administration is going to completely reverse a lot of these policy proposals.
Yeah, that's really important. Aeba, Japanese Conservative Union, you know, we've heard from the congressman about people are concerned in the United States about Biden and China. What do people in Tokyo think about Biden? Will he stand with Japan? Will he stand with the Quad?
はい、とても重要な質問で、基本的な路線は今の菅政権の前の安倍政権が築いたこの路線、つまりクアッド、そして、インド太平洋構想、自由なインド太平洋構想、これを引き継いではいくんですけれども、しかし今の菅政権、特に菅首相は外交能力については未知数だと言われています。なのでこのまま安倍の路線を引き継ぐのか、あるいは中国寄りにぶれていくのか、今非常に注目されているところです。
We are really focusing on these issues, whether the Suga administration is going to, where they are going to. So basically, we expect that Suga administration is going to follow the same political line that former Prime Minister Abe was doing regarding the Quad, and we also expect that we are going to follow to keep working for the Indo-Pacific freedom concept. But however, we think that how the Suga administration is going to do, it's unknown. Nobody knows yet. So whether they are going to follow the same political line of the Prime Minister Abe, or they are going to be more friendly to China, we are not sure. We really have to keep watching on this.
So Cleo, the question is, around the region, how do they view the new administration in Washington?
Well, one of the interesting things that the Trump administration did, and this came out in the Pottinger document, but it was very visible on the ground, was they gave the tools needed to the countries involved. So there's a lot more information sharing, intelligence sharing with India now after the Becker Agreement was signed. They sold a lot of weapons to Taiwan. They've been very supportive of Japan's self-defense force development. So they put a lot of things in place so that the allies could defend themselves in case there was a problem with the U.S. Being politically able to defend it. So I think the question is not so much, will the U.S. will Biden stand with allies in the region, but will Biden stand with the U.S. against China? The countries in the region are definitely going ahead. India blocked TikTok, it blocked WeChat, it's doing comprehensive defense in multiple ways, it's blocked FDI, it's looking at visas, it's going ahead. And as long as there's no brake put on that through things like what used to be used, which is, there are human rights abuses in India, so we have to put a brake on India, and then that breaks their ability to defend themselves against China, which is actually what they need to do, then the allies will be okay. But the question is what will happen with the U.S.
So Cleo, really what I'm hearing is that, if we go back decades, the U.S. is the leading security partner in the region. It is the one setting the tone. It's the one with the allies and the relationships. What we might hear going forward is essentially that the countries in the region will be leading the charge rather than the United States.
So that's what we're starting to see around things like supply chain resilience. So one of the entry points for China, they come in through the economic sphere. That has a strategic implication and often is wedded with corruption. So in the process, they'll buy people off and corrupt the political system, and then that compromises the democracies in those countries. We've seen that happen potentially in South Korea now with that recent election. In order to kind of be able to get around that, Australia, India, and Japan have been working on creating supply chains that bypass China. So they're doing that without the US, but with the approval of the US. So as long as the US doesn't interfere, I think you're going to see a lot more coordination within the region.
So Congressman, it seems to me, and maybe I'm being too optimistic here, but that the common sense of the American people, as reflected through their representatives such as you, could force the Biden administration to take a more resolute stand than it otherwise would, because people here, you and me and everybody else, are going to force it to. Am I being too optimistic? Because a lot of people say that I am, but I want to hear it from you.
I like your optimism. However, we have a Democratic-run House that Speaker Pelosi is in charge of, and we have a 50-50 Senate. I've had bills as it's related to Chinese aggression and the Chinese Communist Party in last Congress that didn't even move, didn't even get a hearing. I've had bills this Congress that you don't hear Democrats talking about these issues. And unfortunately, when it comes to trade, when it comes to foreign relations, the president, through the Constitution, has an abundance of power to be able to negotiate trade deals, to be able to negotiate these type of agreements. Obviously, militarily has all of the power as it relates to making decisions as commander-in-chief. And I don't believe they are going to come anywhere close to the type of approach that the Trump administration took. In fact, I think they're going to go the opposite direction that the Trump administration took over the last 4 years and the gains that we've had over the last 4 years.
Okay, I'd like to open this up to questions from the audience, but before I do, as I mentioned, I asked people on Twitter what they wanted to know, and we had a question from Ricky __ Elwood, and this is a question for Jay, because Ricky Elwood says, look, the reaction from Tokyo to China on human rights abuses, crimes against humanity, genocide, aggression, Tokyo's been too weak. Do you agree or do you disagree with Ricky Elwood?
今の実態を見る限りは、その通りですと言わざるを得ないとは思いますね。ただ、今、ステュービー議員がおっしゃったように、これからいろんな国がですね、アメリカがどうしてもトランプ政権の時とはちょっと違った形で、引いた形にもしなるとすれば、日本も自国を守るためもそうですし、アジアの責任を取るためにもですね、力強く立ち上がらなければいけない、まさに脱皮するというか、自立するというか、そういった時期がいよいよ来たんじゃないかなというふうにも思っています。
Yes, the person is right by seeing the current situation, but as Congressman Steube mentioned, yes, if other countries are kind of backing up compared with the Trump's administration time, each country, including Japan, has to defend ourselves. And also, we have to be responsible for the security and peace in Asia. So we have to be mature and grow up and stand by strong. We have to stand up strong. So that's the direction that we have to consider that.
Cleo, you just heard what Jay said. What do countries in the region think about Japan's role in providing security?
So Japan is providing some interesting solutions across the region, especially around things like economics. And they're trying to create a different LNG, liquid natural gas system, which would mean that Japanese ships would be going through the region, which justifies freedom of operation navigations. So Japan's approach is actually quite complex and interesting and includes an economic component. And Japan is critical for the area that's likely to be the kinetic front line, which is the islands like Palau, the Micronesian zone, so just beyond Taiwan. We know that China wants to take Taiwan, but they're not stopping at Taiwan. The goal is to get across the Pacific. This is something that we know from World War II, and Japan knows it very well. So Japan has been trying to reinforce the countries of Micronesia, like Palau and Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, all of the sites of major battles during World War II that are going to be critical for defending